Hi everyone, we're Team 7 and we'll be presenting on some cases related to cybersecurity attacks targeting hospitals. We'll first discuss why we selected this topic and then a bit more about the 4 cases we found. Our first 3 cases are related to specific attacks on hospitals, and our 4th case identifies a unique technology vulnerability found in hospitals. Finally, we'll be reviewing some key takeaways from our group discussion of the cases. To begin, we wanted to address why we chose the theme of cyber attacks targeting hospitals. Hospitals have very high-value cyber assets, specifically data in the form of medical records, personal identifiable information, or PII, health insurance information, credit card information, and more. All of these are classified as highly valuable, confidential, and personal information. According to a white paper done by TraceX, a cybersecurity firm, medical information can be worth up to 10 times as much as a credit card number. The comparative pricing in black market trade was given at $1 to $2 for each credit card, but $20 to $40 for each individual's medical records. The rationale is that you can always change or cancel your credit card, but a lot of the information associated with your health records are much harder to replace. Also consider the cyber assets in terms of medical devices. As they become more advanced, they are becoming a part of the Internet of Things. These devices add to the overall scope of what IT would need to account for and protect. At the same time, when you think of hospitals, you wouldn't consider them in the forefront of cybersecurity. A good hospital isn't going to be known for their mature cybersecurity practices or robust firewalls. This is reflected in hospital IT budgets. In an IEEE Spectrum article, John Halamka, CIO of Boston Hospital's Beth Israel Deaconess, is quoted, "In healthcare, we spend about 2% on IT, and security might be 10% of that. Compare that percentage to the security spending of financial firms. Fidelity spends 35% of its budget on IT." When an organization has limited budget, you start seeing an increase in vulnerabilities and decrease in awareness, expertise, and focus by the personnel. Our thinking is that with this juxtaposition of high-value cyber assets and low focus and investment in protecting these assets, hospitals should be very vulnerable. We wanted to research and validate if 1, hospitals are indeed targets of attacks, and 2, if so, are there common vulnerability points, and what can hospitals do to address them?
Our first attack occurred at Methodist Hospital, a small general medical and surgical hospital with 167 beds and 1,200 plus staff members that has been serving the small Henderson, Kentucky community since 1948. On Friday, March 16, 2016, the hospital declared an internal state of emergency. The hospital stated, via a scrolling red banner on its website, that a computer virus had limited their use of electronic and web-based services. The local Area 14 News was the first to report on the matter, stating that the hospital was working with the FBI to investigate and restore service as soon as possible. Around 67 hours later on the following Monday, 14 News reported that the hospital once again had its systems up and running following the breach. On the day of the breach, files, documents, and images on the hospital's servers were encrypted using the strain of ransomware named Locky. The hackers demanded an exchange of bitcoins in return for the encryption key of an amount nearing $1,600 at that day's exchange rate. The blog Naked Security by Sophos gives a detailed description of the Locky ransomware involved in this breach. The most common path of arrival is that of an email containing an attached document that appears illegible to the reader. The document advises the reader to enable macros. By enabling these macros, code is run inside the document that saves a file to the disk and runs it. This saved file serves as a downloader, which receives the malware payload, the Locky malware, from the hackers. Files on the infected server, with extensions identifying them as videos, images, source code, office files, and more, are encrypted and saved with the extension .locky, while the original files, including shadow files, are all deleted. The malware posts a message, similar to the one on the right of the screen, detailing how a user can pay up in Bitcoin of the requested amount in order to receive the code to decrypt the files. This attack on Methodist Hospital comes just 1 month after a similar, well-publicized ransomware attack on an LA hospital, shedding light on the vulnerable nature of such large and important institutions and the increasing sophistication of these ransomware attacks. As the Bitcoin transactions take place on the dark web, it becomes very difficult to track down the hackers involved in these attacks. The threat of ransomware attacks is often targeted at hospitals such as these by hackers with malicious intent. The assets within hospital networks are pertinent records of information that healthcare providers require immediate access to, so hospitals become easy prey to paying ransom in order to regain access. David Park, the chief operating officer at Methodist Hospital, told reporters for 14 News that the biggest harm inflicted was that of downtime when hospital employees were forced to shift to a paper processing system using backed up records. Park refused to disclose which servers had been compromised, but was quoted as stating that the hackers did not obtain patient information. The Locky ransomware infected the hospital's network after a social engineering attack when a phishing email with a bugged attachment was opened by a hospital staff member. The malware then bounced around the hospital's network, although the number and nature of infected servers remains undisclosed. The hospital is reported to have been working with the FBI following the breach and followed an internal, pre-established protocol for cybersecurity attacks, where all desktop computers were shut down and brought online once again, one by one after scanning for signs of the infection. All reports of the incident claim that the hospital was able to regain control of its systems without paying the demanded ransom. In the future, attacks like this can be countered through initiating consistent education and awareness among staff members of the dangers of social engineering and phishing scams, as well as maintaining up-to-date and patched web browsers and plugins that will prevent malware from downloading and gaining access to the root systems. Change management should also be considered in an attempt to understand whether any files were corrupted after regaining access. For example, by comparing the size of the documents before and after to locate any missing information, or larger files indicating an injection of malware into the restored document. Network segmentation is also a must when considering the development of a strong security posture. In this way, if an attack involving malware such as ransomware does occur on a server, the malware will not have the immediate access to pertinent assets in the system, such as patient records, personal identifiable information, or personal card information.
Our next case is an example of the need for physical security in hospitals. On August 8, 2014, Mount Sinai reported that a personal laptop was stolen from the staff lounge at Beth Israel Hospital in New York City. This computer belonged to an OBGYN who used it to store emails containing patient care information, including names, birth dates, clinical information, medical records, and procedure codes. It was reported that none of the information contained insurance information. The hospital's lack of physical security led to this theft, as the staff room from which it was stolen lacked secure access controls. It was reported that an unknown individual entered the common space, stole the laptop, and fled the scene. With no video surveillance footage to work with, the identity of the thief remains unknown, and there have been no reports that the stolen laptop was recovered. The fact that the laptop was stolen may not have been as big of an issue if the laptop was secured. This particular device was only password protected, meaning that once the password was cracked, all of its contents were made available. As the laptop included patient information, the hospital was at risk of violating laws to ensure privacy of the patient's health information. After the incident, Mount Sinai launched a personal education module around data security and added additional door locks and security cameras to its facility. As the thief was never apprehended and no data from the laptop has yet to surface, the intent behind the theft, whether malicious or benign, remains unknown. However, there is a significant threat as to what an individual can do with the access to a medical care provider's laptop, accessing private health information or payment information. The private health information of over 10,000 individuals stored on the laptop was put at risk with this theft. There is also the potential harm of the user gaining access to applications, databases, and launching man-in-the-middle attacks or engaging in social engineering via the doctor's private email. The major vulnerabilities that led to this incident included 1. A failure to properly protect data on a personal device with only one weak layer of access controls, a simple password, and 2. The lack of physical security and monitoring in staff areas. PC World reported that other hospitals and their vendors, like Hartford Hospital and their contractor EMC, a data security firm, were slapped with a fine of $90,000 after a contractor to the hospital had his personal laptop stolen from his home. The laptop was unencrypted and over 8,800 patient health records were released. All of these charges could have been avoided if the hospitals, as well as their contractors, required each device which interacted with HIPAA information to be encrypted and have stronger access controls. Some of the immediate measures taken by Mount Sinai were to launch into an education module regarding the handling of sensitive information and their security policies, as well as installing additional security cameras and locks around staff rooms. They could also improve their security by investing in encryption software They should also consider reviewing and developing stronger security policies regarding the use of personal devices, access control, and securing sensitive data both inside and outside of their network.
As healthcare is now highly dependent on digital records and network connectivity, inability to access information systems could have far-reaching impacts beyond dollars spent. Patients and staff safety could be compromised and lives could be lost. While Boston Children's Hospital and other healthcare institutions survived attacks such as this, their experiences should serve as a wake-up call for any healthcare entity that isn't already serious about DDoS security. In April 2014, in protest of the controversial custody case of Justina Pelter, who was a patient at Boston Children's being kept as a ward of the state against the wishes of her parents, hacktivist group Anonymous launched multiple distributed denial of service attacks that targeted the hospital's servers and interrupted its operations for a period of 1 week. Though no children's patient data was ever accessed, the organization had to shut down some of its web pages, and some patients and medical personnel were unable to access online accounts. Anonymous is a loosely based internal network of activist and hacktivist entities. The group is known for a series of well-publicized DDoS attacks on government, religious, and corporate websites. At its peak, Boston Children's hit about 27 gigabytes per second of DDoS traffic, or about 40 times what its usual inbound traffic would have been. Additionally, the hospital suffered direct penetration attacks on exposed ports and websites, and a barrage of malware-infected emails as the hackers attempted to gain internal access into the firewalls. In response, the hospital took down all externally facing sites and shut down the email system for 24 hours, while reinforcing employee education on phishing attacks. The threat in this case was anonymous or similar hacktivist groups targeting Boston Children's Hospital's network vulnerability to make a political statement. The attacks harmed communication, as doctor and clinical staff were unable to route prescriptions electronically or send any emails. The hospital had to shut down the whole system and servers to prevent further malicious cyber attacks and switch to paper processing. A publicized case study posted on Radware, an Israeli cybersecurity solutions provider, described the attack and suggested that the vulnerability proved to be a lack of internet-based protective infrastructure to prevent the DDoS attack, as well as a lack of awareness of employees who fell prey to social engineering in the form of spear phishing emails as the hackers attempted to gain access into the internal firewalls. As soon as it became aware of the threat, Boston Children's Hospital activated its incident response team and used Radware's Scrubbing Center to handle the massive rate of DDoS attacks. Because Boston Children's Hospital shares an internal service provider with 7 other hospitals, these organizations also face potential impacts on their network. Some mitigation techniques for DDoS attacks include using a load balancer to distribute traffic across servers, using network layer controls, setting the internal service provider to only allow traffic from countries in which they do business, and hosting services in the cloud with a provider such as Radware that has advanced DDoS protections included as part of their service. It is important to have an understanding of which systems are dependent on internet access and to have contingency plans in place in the event that the internet goes down. Because the Boston Children's electronic health record system is locally hosted, it remained up and running without the internet, but it still had to explain to staff why they couldn't send prescriptions to pharmacies without email. The organization also should have other secure forms of communication in place.
Our last article is focused less on a specific attack, but instead on a unique vulnerability found within hospitals: the cyber hijacking of medical devices such as MRIs, X-ray machines, ultrasound machines, and more. In a Bloomberg article, it proposes that as medical devices are becoming more advanced and more IoT-enabled, the risk of compromise through cyber attacks are much greater. Even within a secured network, these devices become vulnerable points due to their unique combination of being remotely accessible but unsecured at the same time. In the next slide, we'll go through why these machines are such high security risks. This type of attack has been termed MedJack by a security white paper released by TrapX Labs, a cybersecurity consultant company. In both the white paper and the Bloomberg article, they describe various attack types. In a more theoretical example, meaning that white hackers have shown what could be done, these devices are susceptible to be hacked to impact device reliability and performance. White hat hackers were able to demonstrate in various security summits instances of insulin pumps being remotely tampered with to administer an incorrect dose, or hacking it into a pacemaker to stop operations. Although these are more sensational cases, there have actually been no real reported instances of this happening in the real world. Conversely, where there is a more realistic threat is in the use of medical devices as backdoors to secured networks. In these cases, medical devices infected with command and control malware after a security breach, where the malicious code leverages these networks connected to devices to move more freely within a secured network. There are key reasons why medical devices are especially vulnerable. First, the design and operational model of these devices. As these devices are designed for very specific usage in mind, for example, monitoring patient vitals, there is less of an urgency to ensure the latest operating system along with its security patches are used. Also, these devices have limited user interfaces to indicate tampering or breach, especially as it relates to the device being hacked. Secondly, the service and operational model for medical devices also increase their vulnerability against cyber attacks. As these devices are usually heavily used, either active or need to be available, there is little time allotted for servicing. This is also impacted by the high cost for a lot of these medical devices and the limited number available within a hospital. Also, manufacturers are responsible for device upkeep, especially for things like software patching. These services are usually done on an ad hoc basis, more as a reactive than proactive measure. Lastly, the fact that these are medical devices and thus regulated by the FDA also limits how they can be serviced. As devices are FDA approved, any maintenance or change done by the hospital can be considered tampering and would void warranties and could put the device out of compliance. Hospital IT usually treat these devices as black boxes, where there is minimal internal knowledge aside from operational understanding on the front end of the device. A hospital IT team would have limited understanding or ability to fix or even monitor activities on the devices.
To recap, using the threat vulnerability framework, we see commonalities from the previous cases. Malicious threats in the form of hackers looking to either steal private medical data or to impact critical hospital operations. The vulnerability in this case is a combination of unsecure medical devices and a lack of awareness by hospital personnel and regulating units as a whole. The harm can be categorized in 3 areas. 1. The loss of actual medical data, whether it's medical information, payment information, or other PII. 2. An impact on the quality and integrity of patient care due to lack of access, malfunctioning equipment, or even compromised equipment. And 3. Once any existing firewalls are bypassed, the devices become vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks that the involved parties might not be able to identify or correct. As IoT technologies continue to expand, the scope of these vulnerabilities also increases. As an immediate countermeasure, hospitals should formulate review and mitigation strategies for existing devices, such as a policy to sunset older devices that are at higher risk. The effective long-term control seems to be to hold the device manufacturer responsible, basically to set internal guidelines for device acquisitions, testing, and ongoing maintenance. Finally, the hospital can also isolate the devices within a separate firewall that will limit both exposure and contain any potential breaches. But this comes at a cost of administration overhead.
There are a few key takeaways we found as a group through our articles and discussions. Firstly, we definitely feel that cyber attacks against hospitals are a real threat and a threat on the rise. Based on an article from the Insurance Journal summarizing a study done by the Panman Institute, not only are cyber attacks costing an estimated $6 billion a year, but attacks against healthcare providers have more than doubled in the past 5 years. Even in our research, just a basic Google search turned up numerous accounts and articles in this area that we could have chosen from. Secondly, within the CIA triad model, there are commonalities in the harm impacting confidentiality, where medical data is not accessed by authorized parties, and availability, where either data or services are not made available to authorized parties due to the attack. These are critical challenges for hospitals due to the combination of the sensitivity of the data stored, as well as the critical nature of the services that are dependent on this data. We also discussed that with IoT-enabled medical devices, impact to data integrity is likely on the horizon with increased threats of command and control malware. Finally, another common theme is around difficulties for hospitals to counter threats due to limited IT budget and maturity. A low-hanging fruit that we would recommend for hospitals would be to increase awareness and education around cybersecurity within the hospital staff, specifically on social engineering attacks as a countermeasure. While different studies attempt to put a dollar figure against the impact of cyber attacks, ultimately the biggest harm is the loss or potential loss of life that results from these attacks. Hospitals and the healthcare industry as a whole must start taking a more proactive and focused approach to safeguard themselves against cyber attacks.